Hello, this is Allison and Carolee presenting Trebuchets. We will talk about the science, history, and other weapons that worked alongside the trebuchets. Our first part will be on the history. Some basics. In order for a weapon to be considered a trebuchet, it must have a sling, a throwing arm, and needs to be powered by a counterweight. The trebuchets we know and love are from medieval times and are considered a medieval siege weapon, not an ancient weapon. They are perfect for hurling large stones at your enemy's castles from a good distance back and ensuring that you will win that crusade. Also, some fun trivia, trebuchets were nicknames. Names included the Warwolf, the Tribute, the Victorious, the Furious, the Bullocks, God's Stone Thrower, and Bad Neighbor. Now let's go to the birth of trebuchets. We don't know when trebuchets began, but we kinda do. The first thing we know is that there are 3 stages to the evolution of trebuchets. The earliest was a traction trebuchet, in which the throwing arm was pulled down by manpower and then launched. It was largely ineffective, and the full power of the trebuchet was yet to be realized. Next, we have the trebuchet with a counterweight powering it, instead of humans. It was better, but because the counterweight wasn't done properly, the lifespan of the trebuchet was short until, they added a hinge. That was it. It was complete. The trebuchet was faster, more powerful, and now a real weapon of war. Back to the traction trebuchet. It is believed to have originated in China and required between 15 and 45 men pulling on ropes to prepare the trebuchet, and could fire about 100 to 200 feet with 250 pounds. Mohists had these babies in about 400 BC, and then around the year 500 AD, it spread to the eastern Mediterranean. From there's a whole bunch of Muslim conquests, and around this time the Scandinavians got a hold of some trebuchets. This was around 873, or so we believe. From here, the counterweight was added by, this dude, Muslim guy, in the 12th century. Then, with the perfect trebuchet, many great crusades and sieges transcended across Europe for many, many, many years. Now let's flash back to the Chinese. They didn't have the new trebuchets and realized this when they lost a battle in 1268. They saw the new Muslim-engineered counterweight trebuchets and decided to design their own counterweight trebuchet, which wasn't too different. Finally, gunpowder was invented and put the trebuchet to shame. Cannons and guns dominated the war world, and so what was to become of our beloved trebuchets? The mighty medieval war siege machine that killed and conquered for centuries is now used for the Chunkin' Pumpkin competition in Delaware. Oh, how the mighty fall. That is the history of the trebuchet from beginning to the end. Now, let's move on to the science with Carolee.
Hi everybody! Let's get right down to the nerdy, nitty-gritty science behind trebuchets. Modern trebuchets work basically the same way as they did in medieval times. Today, however, we have advanced technology, like computers, to make trebuchets more accurate, faster, and able to launch objects further. These modern trebuchets are designed entirely on high-tech computers that take into account all kinds of trigonomic functions and equations, none of which we understand because we aren't high-tech computers. So today, we will stick to the basics. At the heart of trebuchet physics is the arm. On one end is the counterweight, which provides power and energy in a downward motion due to gravity. This counterweight should be significantly heavier than the projectile. On the other end of the arm is the sling. This is what releases and launches the projectile. The angle of the finger or tip of the arm affects the angle of the sling when it releases, like this. Also, the trebuchet works best if this part of the arm is about 3 times longer than the part with the counterweight. The arm is usually at a 45-degree angle when the projectile is launched, traveling in an arced path due to the centripetal force acting on it. And that, my friends, is the basics of trebuchet physics. Now, for a little bit on our own trebuchet. Our trebuchet has a base that is 48.5 centimeters wide, 102.5 centimeters long, and 93 centimeters high. The arm is 132 centimeters long. It also has a bucket where we can store extra parts and make the counterweight heavier. To fire it, we pull the arm down and attach it with twine and a firing pin at the base. Then we place the sling and projectile in the chute. When ready, we pull the firing pin, releasing the counterweight and launching the water balloons. Well, back to Allison to tell you more about the weapons used in the time period.
Thank you, Carolee. Well, now that we understand the science behind it, we also know the history behind trebuchets, now I think it's about time that we talk about the other weapons of the time. Now keep in mind that trebuchets were around for a good bit of time. The time I'm going to talk about will be medieval Middle Ages. Now, of course, when we hear medieval, we usually think of knights and armor, and they're riding horses, and they're battling with swords, and yeah, that's pretty true. I mean, we're picturing the right thing. Among the swords that they used, each one had a name. Some of the types of swords they used were called the longsword, the two-handed claymore, the sabina, which was actually an everyday type sword. Aside from swords, they also had blunt force weapons. These weapons included such things as the flail, the warhammer, a morning star, and the mace. You know, those things with chains and all the spikes. Those weapons were what were used hand to hand or just in close range on battlefields. I mean, obviously. There are also different siege type weapons, such as a trebuchet. Other siege weapons included catapults and ballistas. Now, a ballista basically is like a high-powered crossbow. It's mostly powered by string, which is akin to a drawstring, and they're very light and rather mobile, although they don't have a lot of power, which makes them not as effective as a trebuchet. The second siege weapon is a catapult, which we're all familiar with. In fact, a lot of people confuse trebuchets and catapults, and that's because a trebuchet is a type of catapult. But the main difference between them is a catapult is powered by a tightly wound string, while a trebuchet is powered by gravity through a counterweight. A catapult will launch things farther than the trebuchet, but it still won't launch things as hard as a trebuchet can. So when it comes to just sheer power and force, trebuchets lead the siege world. As far as other weapons of the time go, that's honestly it. There's a multitude of different types of swords, different types of blunt weapons. There are also spears and bows and arrows, and all sorts of other things. But the main ones to know would be swords, blunt force weapons, catapults, ballistas, and trebuchets. And the last three are siege type weapons, whereas the other ones are more like on the battlefield. So that's it for the other types. Thank you guys for listening. I'm sure this was a real fun video. Thank you for your time, and we hope that you now know the history, science, and some of the other weapons that are all part of the trebuchet. Thank you again. Goodbye.